Hey everyone, Warwick's here. Patch 9.2 is here, and we're going to continue on with our monk guides. Today we're doing Mistweaver Monk. Mistweaver's been on a bit of a roller coaster ride since the start of this expansion. In 9.0, it wasn't a great healer at all, though it still had decent enough throughput for most content. In 9.1, with the introduction of Covenant Legendaries, they saw a big uptick in their throughput because of the Venthyr Sinister Teachings Legendary. Now, some tuning to that Covenant has happened, and it has seen Mistweaver fortunes drop a little bit. That said, they're still a really solid healer, and I think that it is undervalued actually at this point. If you're looking for the weekly key level or even Keystone Hero levels, it's perfectly fine in AOTC, or if you're like a late mythic cutting edge style guild. So today we're going to talk about everything that you need to get started with Mistweaver Monk in 9.2, or just update you on the information if you're coming back to Mistweaver for patch 9.2. So we're going to look at the talents, the covenants, the legendaries, the tier set, the soulbinds, the conduits, stats, consumables, all of that. We're going to skip rotation in this video because really it's just about, I'll kind of briefly touch on it. It's just keep your renewing mists up, rising sun kick on cooldown, vivify cleave, essence font on, not quite on cooldown, but every 15 seconds you want an essence font because of a legendary interaction. So healing rotations are just kind of difficult because it's much more reacting to the situation while trying to be proactive enough to set yourself up for success. So anyways, let's jump right into the talent build here. And the talent build for Mistweaver Monk has slightly changed. And that's on the 15 row where Chi Burst, once you have your cheer bonus, starting to become by far and away the best talent. By some people's measurements, I think this row is still pretty much pick whatever you want. I've been using Chi Burst for a little bit, really enjoy it. Mist Wrap is still fine, getting that extra duration on Enveloping Mist, as well as the extra healing bonus. So if you find that you're lacking healing output, Mist Wrap is going to be a good talent to help you get that little extra bonus healing through Enveloping Mist. Other than that, everything else is still pretty much the same. You're going to run Torpedo or Tiger's Lust. I play with both depending on my mood. You still have Dampen Harm or Diffuse Magic depending on the situation you find yourself in. Refreshing Jade Wind is starting to be the very clear raid pick, with Invoke GG being very good in Mythic Plus. And then Rising Mist is still the best talent on the 50 row, still capping off the build nicely, and is logically the only talent for PvE purposes. Focus Thunder does see play in PvP, but I am not smart enough to talk about PvP in this video, so we're not going to do that. All right, as far as covenants go, as you can see, I'm in Seat of the Primus. Necrolord has shown to be kind of like the second best covenant for Mistweaver. Venthyr still sits on top, and Kyrian is a potential good third option for Mythic Plus purposes. Night Fae, it just falls very far behind because there's a mana cost on Feline Stomp, and that mana cost is a little bit prohibitive. And the Covenant Legendary isn't really enough to boost the Covenant at all. So unless you just really like Night Fae, I would avoid Night Fae for Mistweaver Monk as much as possible. Now, Venthyr did go through a little bit of a roller coaster in the beta with the Sinister Teachings change, going from 5 seconds of cooldown reduction for Mistweaver to 2.5 seconds. In the meantime, they also put back in a thing where you would get 1 or 0 Enveloping Mists out of your healing clone, which was a huge nerf to the spec's power. Blizzard did go back and fix that, so you're getting 2 every single time, but it still put the spec in flux for a little bit during the PTR cycle. Overall, if you're Venthyr, you're going to be less reliant on Fallen Order for your throughput, so you'll need to kind of shift your playstyle a little bit back to maintaining Renewing Mists and Rising Mist uptime and things like that. For Necrolord, it was buffed in 9.2 for Mistweaver because Bone Dust couldn't crit for healing anyways, so the 5% flat buff that it got to kind of compensate for Brewmaster and Windwalker is just a straight up buff for Mistweaver, so that makes this ability just even better to use. Kyrian's Weapons of Order has potential, but I think it only happens once double legendaries come into play, and it's likely only for Mythic Plus because of the breaking of your cooldown syncing between Chi and Weapons of Order. You're now going to break those cooldowns apart with Call to Arms, and you get Weapons of Order getting you 12 seconds of Chi uptime, and then you use regular Chi or vice versa. I'd recommend Weapons of Order then Chi if you're running that setup. It has really high DPS potential for high DPS potential for Mistweaver because of the extended Chi uptime, but overall it's probably going to fall somewhat behind Venthyr and Necrolord. But you can run it, especially on necrotic weeks, if you want to use the clay attack, which we'll kind of point out here in just a little bit. Alright, let's talk Legendaries. So for Legendaries, if you're Venthyr, Sinister Teachings until we do double Legendaries, which as of recording will be next week. Sinister Teachings is going to be the best option. Once we kind of get into the double Legendaries, which is what I'm going to be referencing here, Ancient Teachings of the Monastery is going to be the overall best option. Tear of Mourning is still a decent second option, even if it is a little bit more mana intensive. It empowers your Vivify healing. Tear of Mourning still has very good potential in Mythic Plus. Ancient Teachings is going to just run pretty well in all situations. So if you're min-maxing Mythic Plus, you may want to run Tear of Mourning. If you're just kind of a generalist or just want something that's good for both sets of content, Ancient Teachings of the Monastery is going to be very safe. So you just get really good strong buff. As far as the Covenant side of things, Bountiful Brew got a couple of good quality of life changes that make it actually ended up being a buff to the spec overall. And that is that normally before this patch, when Bountiful Brew procced, it wouldn't proc if you already had a Bone Dust Brew out. Now what it does is that if you have a Bone Dust Brew already active on your targets and Bountiful Brew procs, it just refreshes the duration of your Bone Dust Brew buff on your allies or debuff on your enemies. This makes it so that you can have really long uptime if you get the right RNG. So there is potential for this to be either really good, or if you get unlucky and then bust out, you get very low uptime on this. So it is a little bit RNG, which makes it slightly less unreliable than something like Sinister Teachings. But from what I understand, the procs per minute on this is pretty decent. And like I said, if you hit a little bit of a jackpot, you can get a really long uptime. I know in some folks testing, they were getting potentially up to minute-long Bone Dust Brew buffs on their targets, which is just a lot of extra healing output. So Sinister Teachings remains Sinister Teachings. It's going to be what it is. It's very powerful. As you can see, it did get nerfed from 5 to 2.5 seconds for Brewmaster and Windwalker to still 5 seconds, so it was just a nerf for Mistweaver, but still going to be one of your best options come double Legendary setups. And like I said, Call to Arms, we'll probably see some people playing around with it because of the extra uptime on your Celestial. Like I said, I think this is only going to work in Mythic Plus because Yu'lon is super mana intensive and is not really going to be worth it long term in the mana department for a raid situation. So I don't see Kyrian and raid being a thing. But with Chi and the strength of Chi itself allowing you more melee uptime, Call to Arms allowing you a lot higher uptime. I think it's 36 seconds potentially of uptime during a pull or during a boss fight is going to be quite powerful and will allow for some nice interplay there. Now the thing about Call to Arms is the Weapons of Order summon of Shiji does not proc Invoker's Delight, which was something that we had theorized when we first saw the possibility of when they first announced double Legendaries. But some testing was done, so you won't get the double sort of Bloodlust haste value out of it when you get the Call to Arms summon. So for slots, Ancient Teachings goes in the wrist. For the Unity Legendary, which will be what it's called, Memory of Unity, you can either run it in the belt slot that you get for the quest reward initially. However, that legendary cannot be upgraded and it cannot be scrapped because it's just a straight up quest reward. So eventually you're going to have to recraft it. There you'll have the option. You can either recraft back into your belt slot at 291 If you get your 4 pieces of tier, you can put it into the highest budget slot that is non-tier piece. So say for example you get head, shoulders, legs, and chest, then you'd want to put it into your glove slot or your boot slot, because those are kind of the same stat budget. But if you get like head, gloves, legs, and shoulders, then you would want to recraft into your chest slot, because you're going to get the most bang for your buck out of the stat budget of a 291 piece. But if you just want to be safe, like if you're like me and you multi-spec, you can put it in boots, because like for example Brewmaster won't use the boot slot for any legendaries positions. Windwalker doesn't either. So if you multi-spec on Monk, you can safely put it into boots, and you're going to be safe for all of your specs that you also play. But if you're min-maxing your power, you will want to just probably leave it in your belt slot, and then once you get your 4-piece, recraft Unity into the highest stat budget item that's left. So let's talk about that tier set. So the tier set for Mistweaver Monk, I think, isn't the most exciting overall. The Mistweaver 2 set bonus basically makes it so that Essence Font's residual healing is increased by 5% and lasts additional 2 seconds. Overall, this bonus is not exciting at all. So I think it's also fairly weak overall, and it doesn't do anything to impact gameplay. You likely won't even notice it most of the time. In reality, it's a forgetful bonus that no one's going to be talking about. Next tier is like, oh, what were the best tier bonuses for patch 9.2. The 4-piece tea of the Grand Upwelling, drinking Thunder Focus tea, summons a Progenitor Rune of Healing, increasing all healing dealt while inside its balance by 450. You drink Thunder Focus tea basically on cooldown as it is. This is just taking something that you already do and making it slightly stronger. This is an overall okay bonus. The rune is bigger than you think, but it also has some leeway outside of it, much like the Mage Rune of Power does. So on movement heavy fights, you can still work with it if you play within the range of the buff enough, or if movement is very static to where you have Thunder Focus tea up every time you need to make these big movement changes. I think this bonus, the 4-piece, is a solid HPS bonus, so it's a good throughput bonus to a spec that already has good throughput. It doesn't shore up any of the weaknesses of Mistweaver Monk. It doesn't do anything to help its damage, for example. It doesn't bring any interesting potential utility uses to the spec. But I would also argue that it really doesn't even greatly enhance the strengths of Mistweaver, which is high throughput, Mystic Touch, and contributing some damage somewhat passively through things like Tear of Morning and in Mythic Plus GG. Alright, so let's swap over to Covenants and Soulbinds particularly. So for oops, hit the wrong button there, sorry guys. Alright, so for Kyrian, if you run Kyrian, you're going to want to play with Clea. Big reason comes through the crit synergies that this spec has. So you get critical strikes that allow you to heal, so just a little bonus healing. Pointed Courage gives you extra critical strike chance, and Light the Path, basically as you have stacks of Valiant Strikes, you gain more crit value. So this really makes crit a very, you don't have to stack crit as much if you're Kyrian, because you're going to get a lot of it passively through your Clea Soulbind. The other thing to look at is something like Hope Springs Eternal. So you get a 20% DR on your file when you drink it, but also it allows the effects to be granted to your lowest health ally. So what a lot of people will do on necrotic weeks is they'll play Clea as the healer. And what they'll do is when they see their tank has high necrotic stacks and low health, they'll file themselves, which also grants it to the tank, which clears the necrotic stacks and allows the tank to stand in there. They top off the tank right after, and then that 8 seconds, they're basically immune to the effects. So there's some good stuff there. You can also do Spear of the Archon if you really want, but I just think Hope Springs Eternal is the best option here. So Clea just offers a lot of crit synergies and a way to kind of help your tank out with necrotic weeks in Mythic Plus. So just overall, amongst all the Soulbinds, isn't the strongest, but is the strongest for Kyrian. So I'll just be able to work with that. For Necrolord, you want Ameni. Basically, everything that Ameni does is all piled into Lead by Example. That says Conqueror's Banner, but let's switch this over to Monk real quick. So Bone Dust Brew basically gives you an intellect buff, and 4 allies also get their primary stat at 2%. And then for each ally affected, you gain another set of int buffs, so you get up to 13% on your intellect buff. So just a very powerful one, and Bone Dust Brew has a very short cooldown, all things considered. It's a 1-minute cooldown, so basically every minute you're giving yourself a 13% intellect buff. Very, very strong. You have Gnashing Chompers. Basically you gain 3% haste after defeating an enemy, so Mythic Plus, this is a really good boost. Gristle Toes you can get for the second potency conduit slot for raid situations, so there's some flexibility and choice. And then towards the bottom you get things like Resilient Stitching. While you're above 90% health, you basically get an Absorb Shield on yourself, so never a bad thing. Helps your own survivability. The less healing you do to yourself, the better. And then Pustule Eruption, when you Fleshcraft, you basically get these pustules that cover you. When you heal yourself or you take damage, they pop doing damage, so this is a damage buff. Easy way to manage this is after you Fleshcraft and you get into a pack, just renewing Mist yourself. And as you take damage and things like that, you'll be able to pop this off. So overall, Ameni is probably one of the strongest Soulbinds period for Mistweaver. Just a lot of really good synergies with Lead by Example, and the intellect buff is just massive. For Night Fae, Dreamweaver, you get, of course, Pod Tender. We all know about Pod Tender. Big one here is Field of Blossoms, just getting that extra haste. Haste in Mythic, for Mythic Plus in particular, is a pretty decent stat. And then you get Dream Delver at the end, giving you increased healing on your target up to 3%, which is quite nice. And then you can also do things like Waking Dreams. When you take damage below 80%, you gain a 20% health shield once every minute. Good little survivability possibility there. Cunning Dreams can work on kiting weak, so Necrotic potentially bolstering as well, but it's very, very niche. And then you also have Empowered Chrysalis, giving people a shield on overhealing, which Mistweaver generally does a lot of overhealing. Because of the way that Ancient Teachings works, it tends to be a lot of overhealing in that case, so making that overhealing valuable, not the worst thing. But you can also run Social Butterfly, getting versatility, increased boost, which is never a bad thing either. Soothing Voice you would just run if you want to get the second potency conduit slot, but for Dreamweaver you're generally only going to run 2 potency slots anyways. And finally for Venthyr, it's the good old Mad Duke. Theotar, you get the boost from Soothing Shade in your Mastery. While Mastery isn't the best stat from Mistweaver Monk, if you get a lot of it, it turns out to be pretty good. So if you can stand inside the shade, you're going to get some good boost there. In the middle of the tree, you have 3 really good options in my opinion. Token of Appreciation is probably going to be your default choice, giving a shield to your allies that's equal to your versatility and things of that nature. When you healed somebody. Refined Palette gives combat potions, so your healing potions become a little bit more effective on a little bit of RNG. Wasteland Proprietary is a versatility boost, so all 3 of these have some value. You get It's Always Tea Time, which is a self-sustained for you. You can get healing inside of it while you're standing inside the shade, and 5% damage reduction. So very, very good defensive build. And the Mad Duke's Tea giving you basically a stat boost for 4 hours. That doesn't conflict with any other flask or potions or anything of that nature. Theotar, just very, very powerful overall. Alright, so I'm going to go back to Necrolord because that's where I hang out at. So we're going to go to Ameni. For potency conduits, if you are Venthyr or Necrolord, you want to use your Covenant one. Bone Marrow Hops and Imbued Reflections just boost the power of Bone Dust Brew and of Fallen Order respectively, so those should probably be your first options. Otherwise, as second potency options for those are first for Kyrian and Night Fae. Resplendent Mist, just give Gus your Mastery a bonus chance to do more healing, just a really good throughput. And then as second/third potency conduits, you want to look at something like Rising Sun Revival, which will see more value in raid situations. Jade Bond will have more value in Mythic Plus situations with Chi-Ji, basically giving you increased Soothing Breath on Chi-Ji, but also gives you cooldown reduction on Chi-Ji. Nourishing Chi can see some play for Life Cocoon, but it's very niche. Adaptive Armor Fragment can be useful in raid situations, but overall not really there. So Resplendent Mist, Jade Bond, Rising Sun Revival, and then Necrolords and Kyrians use their Covenant option as well. Finesse Conduits, pick any of these. Like always, Dizzying Tumble has kind of become the default because it seems to be the most universally useful, giving you damage reduction, and it goes up to 12%. 12% DR for 5 seconds after you leg sweep. That's not bad. The good thing is this 5 seconds doesn't start until after the leg sweep debuff is, or the leg sweep stun is over. So you're going to get the crowd control with the leg sweep and then the damage reduction afterwards. And then for endurance conduits, there are 2 that you want to go with. Grounding Breath gives you Vivify increase on yourself, so it makes the time you have to spend healing yourself less, and overall less, and you get a chance to refund the cost. So saving the mana is never a bad thing for a spec that historically does struggle with mana issues. And then if you need a second one, Fortifying Ingredients, giving you that big shield when you use Fortifying Brew. You won't use Harm Denial because you don't use Expel Harm as a Mistweaver. Condensed Animosphere can work as a third one if you're running a triple endurance setup for any reason. Pretty much in all cases you're not going to with Mistweaver for PvE purposes. But if you need it, that's the third option that you would want to go with. So those are the conduits and the Soulbinds. Let's move on now to stats. So for stats for Mistweaver Monk, mine are a little bit scuffed because I've focused a lot on Brewmaster gearing, because that is my main spec. Mistweaver is my off spec. But for stats, it does vary a little bit depending on Covenant choice. Venthyr does want more crit stacking to maximize the CDR and Sinister Teachings. But beyond that, crit verse for raid tends to be the safest options. So for me, as Brewmaster, crit verse is also good to have. So crit and verse, very good there. For Mythic Plus though, eye level tends to be the king. You'll see a lot of Mistweavers tend to stacking a little bit more haste, which I don't think is the worst idea in the world, because you get better CDR on Rising Sun Kick, faster cast times on things like Vivify, faster channels on things like Soothing Mist if you're doing heavy single target healing. So you'll see Mythic Plus based Mistweavers looking to do a little bit more haste stacking, which I think is perfectly fine. But when in doubt, you can always just pick higher eye level, and it's pretty much going to be a safe choice for most of the situations. But I would say like haste crit or haste verse is probably going to be a little bit more valuable in Mythic Plus, whereas crit verse will be the most valuable in raid, just to reiterate that. As far as consumables go, I need to get this thing enchanted, but Fortified Leech is going to be the best option for Mistweavers because Leech does actually impact your healing. You can also, if you really want to, go speed or avoidance if you feel like you need it, but I would say Leech overall is going to be your best option. You want eternal stats on chest, so the 30 stats, 15 intellect on the bracers, and then for ring enchants, you can go crit, verse, or haste, whatever you feel like you need the most of. I obviously use these for Brewmaster, so they have versatility enchants, and as you can see, I have like a haste gem in here just to provide a little bit more balance to my stats. For gems, you can do haste, crit, or verse. All three work just fine. For weapon enchant, I need to get, well, I'm probably going to upgrade this thing soon, but you'll need Celestial Guidance as your weapon enchant to give you that extra intellect buff. So if you're Necrolord, you're getting 13% from your Ameni, lead by example, and if you get a proc of Celestial Guidance during the Ameni buff, it's 18% intellect. That's a huge increase to your mana pool, to your overall healing output. So you can see there's some really good synergies being built there. For flax and potions, so you're going to want to go Spectral Flask of Power as always. For Desolate Armor Kits for extra stamina. For food, you can want to do the Feast if you can. If not, it's always safe to go Stake a la Mode or the Crit Food or even the Haste Food. All three of those are just fine. You want to avoid the Mastery Food because Mastery just isn't as valuable. And depending on your Covenant, you're going to get a lot of boost through your Mastery anyway, so you're not going to need a ton going on there. For oils, you'll want to use Shadow Core or Embalmer's Oil. They're pretty much the same. Shadow Core Oil is more offensive focused, and Bomber's Oil is more healing throughput focused. So you can choose either one, and I think you're going to be okay overall. So my thoughts on Mistweaver overall coming into patch 9.2 and what we've seen so far of the spec is that while the buzz of Mistweaver from PTR did die down with the Venthyr nerf, they still provide a very strong throughput to the point that I think it's underrated again. Mainly because Holy Priest and Resto Druid have been getting a lot of shine in the ongoing race to World First, because Liquid, Echo, and Pieces have been seeing a lot of those specs being played in their healing comps at this time. We've seen a little bit of Mistweaver, not as much as I would have liked to have seen, but I think because of the fact that Holy Priest and Resto Druid is just getting a lot of spotlight because they're in even over Paladin and Disc Priest at this point, that a lot of people are kind of overlooking Mistweaver again because they're not seeing it in Race to World First, which, despite the fact that those guys play a completely different game than 99% of the population of the game does, people take what they're doing and copy it, unfortunately. So Mistweaver is kind of outside the spotlight once again. If you're a veteran Mistweaver monk, you know that this isn't anything new. If you're new, I'm sorry, kind of get used to it. People are going to think your spec isn't as good because you're not playing it in things like Race to World First, or it's not the choice in MDI or the high keys, things of that nature. That said, if you are the Mistweaver in your guild, or you have a Mistweaver in your guild and you're wondering if it's worth it to bring them along to your raid situation, the answer is yes. You can get them, definitely bring them into your raid, especially if you need the Mystic Touch debuff. You're going to get safe healing throughput from them, good mobility on the fights that require the mobility, a good cooldown in revival, a good tank defensive in Life Cocoon. So you're just getting some really decent ability at Ring of Peace to help with mob control. So overall, like, the spec itself is still very good, and I think you can bring it into your raid or into your Mythic Plus group, and you're going to be in a very good place overall. So that's the guide on Mistweaver Monk, everyone. I will try to get Windwalker and Death Knight done over the next week or so. I apologize for the lack of videos outside of my streams over the past few weeks. I've had some IRL stuff that's come up that's required my attention, but with some of that stuff settling down, I'm hoping that I can get back to doing that one video a week that I promised myself that I would try to do this year. So we're gonna go from there. So until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you all are getting your vaccinations and your boosters. If you haven't already, please do so. Get the world back to normal. I support the Ukraine and their ongoing conflict with Russia. So much love to any Ukrainians that happen to be watching this, or, I know you got a lot of other shit going on right now, but if you took time to watch this, my love to you guys. And I will see you all in the next video.